before sort of Judy gets started, to introduce the teaching partnership to those of you who don't know sort of who we are and what we do. So there are 23 accredited social work teaching partnerships in England, which are funded by the Department for Education. Our partnership includes local authorities, children's trusts, NHS trusts, and higher education institutes and universities. And we have a total of 28 partners. And we work with our partners to ensure high quality social work education and social work practice across our region. And one of the ways we do this, there are many ways, but one of them is by facilitating CPD opportunities such as this one today. And there's a number of these opportunities in our practice week. And I'm sure you could still book on if you wanted to on some of the remaining sessions today. So, please do give us your feedback on these sessions. It's really important, and that we know the details of your experience so that we can shape our sort of future learning events for you as well. If you do need to say anything, let us know anything today. We have the chat function that you can use, and I will be there at the end to just sort of close the session. I'm looking forward to this today. I have an adults background, so I'm really looking forward to some CPD and something different today. And so I will hand over to Judy.
Okay, thank you, Deborah. So yeah, exactly like Deborah said, this is an opportunity for you to ask any questions. I mean, this is a very bespoke project that we did within WCF, which is Worcestershire Children's First, and so it's a bit of, I'm not sure what you're expecting or what you were hoping for, but hopefully we'll be able to give you some learning and some reflections around this project. But I mean, I don't know if anyone has got anything that they'd want to share now of what they were hoping to get out of this presentation, or whether they've come with a very open mind, because I want to make sure that the people that have attended get from it some learning. But I don't know if there is any. Is there any? And anybody's got any reflections of what they would like to include, or you're happy for me just to crack on, and then you can ask questions throughout the presentation. I'm happy either way. No. Okay, I'll make a start then. So as Deborah said, my name's Judy Mayo. I'm a group manager here within WCF, and my responsibility within the service is that I manage our family support team. That's our early help family support team. So we are a team of family support workers who work very closely with social workers within WCF, but we offer that level 2, level 3 intervention in our levels of need. So this is the intervention and prevention part of the service, but work very closely with our partners in level 4. And the project that I'm going to talk about now is like I said, a bespoke project that we developed back in September of last year as our response to back to school, returning back to school. Okay, so as we know, just sort of giving a bit of a context here, in March 2020, schools closed as physical buildings for all non-vulnerable children and those of critical workers, and a programme of home supported learning began to develop. So as we know, vulnerable children, so children that were deemed vulnerable, and the list in the first lockdown did include CP and child in need children, were offered a space. However, and we can talk a little bit about that later, we know that some of those children did not attend their space. Vulnerable children are those that were open with a social work plan, were able to attend work if a parent carer wanted them to. But during lockdown, the community message was stay at home if you can. So from a service perspective, we were very much supporting our families to access the space, but also recognising that was their choice. But it was a worry for us that some children that had a space that would benefit from being seen by professionals, from having that social aspect, from having that routine, were not attended. Our COVID working protocol, phase 1 and 2, took the message back to parents, and we were encouraging and we were expecting your child to attend their workplace. So that was back in March 20. As we know, what was happening then, schools were only open for a few children. Okay, so that happened. in July, I think schools started to reopen and then closed again from summer. So what we were really worried about, and I'm sure other people were worried about, is children that had been out of education for a long time, whether they were children deemed as vulnerable or just, you know, children that we previously would not have had any worries about, would not have had any support needs. We were recognizing actually this is going to be there's going to be anxieties, there's going to be children that have spent so long at home. It's going to be a real challenge to get back home. So we started to look at the Back to School project. So schools and other education settings provide an essential part of children's plans and contribute to safeguarding. Some children and parents will experience barriers and challenges within returning to school. A child and young person not returning to school will not on its own be a reason for children's social care to undertake an assessment at level 4. So this was a very real, from experience that we had before, a high level of referrals being made to our family front door because children were not at school. Now we recognise those children need help and support, but they certainly did not need help and support from social work intervention. So hidden harm, and to ensuring we get a timely and proportionate response to families to identify any risks and to minimise further delay and impact of non-school attendance is also important to us. So where we recognised actually just children not returning back to school was not a level of concern for us at a level 4, we do absolutely recognise that there will be children that do or do not return back to school in September, but they needed some support due to maybe, you know, the impact of COVID and the non-school attendance was having them on. So where we were saying, yes, we don't need a referral to our family front door because we don't think this is a safeguarding need. We do want to know about these children and we do want to support them. So what was our back to school approach? Who was in our criteria? So one of the things that we wanted to understand as well was children who had previously had concerns around attendance. So in our criteria, so children that we were wanting to be referred to us in the back to school project was children that had had less than 70% attendance. Now that is a high level of lack of attendance, none or very meaningful contact with school during COVID. So for people that was aware that are aware of the protocols around schooling, was that even though children were not at school, they were in contact with their teachers. So the families and the teachers were in contact with each other. So a lot of schools were calling them keeping in touch. So they were weekly calls to the family to check in how it's going. Some families perceived that as they were checking to see if the home learning was being done, but there was aspects of that, I believe, but it was also that how are you doing? Do you need any support? So families where schools had not been able to contact during COVID, they've not been able to keeping in contact, or they'd lacked meaningfulness, they were children that we wanted to know about as well. And absolutely children we did want to know about was children that had not returned or not returned with any consistency from September 2020. And of course we always had that case by case flexibility as well. We never wanted to be a service that was no, you don't meet the criteria, you're not coming in. And part of the referral process that teachers could tell us other things that they were worried about for that family that may have thought actually this family need intervention and prevention. But what we were really clear about is working in partnership with our schools to recognise what our schools could be offering as well. So this is why we had a criteria, because there were some children that didn't meet that criteria that we were thinking actually school have got a role to play in supporting these children. Out of scope for the referral were these cohorts. So looked after children. So the looked after children, we had decided that we were not going to be supporting them through the back to school project in that bespoke project, because they already had key people in their lives, potentially foster carers, social workers, that could all be supporting children back into the school. And that was the same with the children that had an education welfare officer or already were allocated to our service, so already had an early help family support worker, because they were already being supported. Those who didn't meet the criteria and they could access other support, so again a lot of schools have had their own family support workers, they were accessing other support. And then for people who may or may not know, there was a service that was launched by Bernardo's called See, Hear, Respond, and again they were supporting people. So for us within WCF, it's always really important that we don't want to overload families with lots of support from lots of different agencies. So we were very clear, if the family were already being supported and they were already being supported back to school, then they would carry on being supported by that service. And the criteria on the left hand side was what we were looking at, where had there been historical concerns about COVID, where the school had not been in contact with the children at all from that March to September, where they'd not returned in September, because in September it was an absolute expectation that all children were to go back. It wasn't by choice at that point. However, there was no schools that were following the sort of legality of it all, but it was very important that children got the message, families got the message that they were back to school. But then we also had that flexibility, because we know families don't come in all shapes. We know families come in all shapes and sizes. So what was our offer? The referrals would be directly from the school and be triaged. So we were receiving the referrals directly. It wasn't expected to go through the family front door. It wasn't expected to come through the family support method. It was quick, easy referral form direct to us as a service. We were triaging. We were meeting twice a week because we didn't know the level, the numbers, and with this situation, we didn't want it to drag. We didn't want it to delay. So we were triaging twice a week. Now, within Worcestershire, we use the signs of safety model for people that are aware of that intervention and that model of working. It's a strength-based model around, in a nutshell, it's about talking to families around what are our worries, what are the strengths of the family, and what we need to address those. And our whole model of intervention was based on that. What are our worries? What are the strengths of the families? What have the families done before previously when they've been able to make changes? And what are we and our partners within this plan of intervention going to do to support that family? Each family, and child and parent had a worker, so we allocated them a family support worker. We were also working with our partners within the Worcestershire Health and Care Trust, and they developed a programme of online learning sessions, which we'll talk about a little bit more. And then one of the project real bespoke and innovative ways of working, we were looking to get some mentors, and these were going to be peer mentors of other young people. So that was the offer: family support worker, online development, online learning from our Health and Care Trust, and support mentors from a young person. Okay, so these are the 12 workshops that were delivered online. So a programme of 12 health and wellbeing workshops were designed and delivered live by health professionals in supporting the project. Many of the sessions were also recorded and available to watch at another time. So I think if you have a scan over those 12 courses, the 12 online workshops that were available, you can see that there were a lot about some of the issues that families were telling us around why they may have had issues returning back to school. So routines, we all know, most of us during lockdown, all routines, you know, our normal way of living and still now are different. But there was a lot around worries and anxieties, and that wasn't around just around COVID, but it was a lot of what we were hearing was around COVID, and a lot of these other sessions were very much around how they were managing with change, how they were managing their regulations. And what we will say, and I'll come on to this again in the slide a bit further, what we absolutely noticed, the majority of our referrals that were referred to the back to school project, children were being referred due to significant attendance issues prior to COVID. However, COVID has completely compounded and compacted the situation. And if you like, families that were already in that position of whether, you know, we know children don't attend school for lots of different reasons, but there was some families that were saying, you know, I couldn't get my child to school before COVID, and I am really struggling now because of that lack of that routines that they had. Okay. So within 2 months, so we did a bit of a midway review. So towards the end of 2020, we did a bit of a stock take of where we were with the project. So 71 children had been referred to the project, and that was from 36 different schools. The triage outcomes, 89% of the children that were referred to us, we accepted onto the project. so out of all the families, the 71 children, we referred back to the schools. I think if you remember from what I was saying before, we actually said, they don't meet our criteria. We think school, you should be following your pathway of how you support children, because we recognise that majority of the time it's the school's responsibility to support those children back into education. And 8% were referred to the See, Hear, Respond project. So we felt that they didn't meet our criteria, which was quite a high level of criteria, but we supported them to the Bernardo See, Hear, Respond. At that point, Back to School was working with 54 families. 5 children on the project already had a child in need or a CP plan, and tools and resources were being shared out with social workers. So where we said, actually, it's already being supported, you as a social worker can support this. So our resources within the Back to School project, we shared with social workers, and they carried on that support. Initial referrals saw non-attendance as a longer term pre-COVID issue. So I think that, from what I was saying before, most of the referrals we were getting, children that we were receiving referrals for and we were working with, there'd been long-standing COVID issue, long-standing attendance issues. October, we saw a new influx of those where COVID had been a more primary factor. So what was happening is, in September, we sent out comms to the schools to say, Back to School project, a bespoke project, refer the children that you're worried about. We had the referrals from children they had worried about back in the start of 2020. But as October, November came, some children had started back in September, then they'd sort of lapped off. So we saw more of actually the impact of COVID. And of course, then there were more concerns of a second wave. So then we saw more referrals come through around, actually, we hadn't any previous worries, but now we're starting to see a lack of attendance. So reason given by parents of non-attendance was increasing stress and worried, followed by the loss of routine. So that was at 2 months. So finally then, so let me just talk a little bit about the project. So in relation to the project, what we did was, as we said, with workers, my team support families. With family support, we're all about the intervention. We're all about what do these families need to make positive changes, working in partnership with changes. But we knew with Back to School, some of these children, it was entrenched attendance issues. Some of these children had not been attending school for such a long time. So we really needed that slow intervention. Often some of our workers were visiting the family 3 times a week to try and establish some of those routines, and also working with families around their worries and around their anxieties, but also working with the schools, because we know some schools very much see the attendance as an issue. It's a data problem, it's an issue for that young person. And what we found was the relationship had broken down between the school and the parents, and there was a lot of the school wanted the children there, parents wanted the children there, but they couldn't meet in the middle. So a lot of our work was getting schools and parents on board around saying what is the barriers to the learning, and the attending school. One of the positives that came out of this was the home learning environment, and actually some children, we were not successful in getting them back into school, but because we've all learned now what we can do virtually, but they had engaged with the online virtual learning. So we have to sort of recognise that that school environment for some children, as much as we think how much they would benefit from the social aspect of attending school and all the other things that school does, it was also about they were still being able to access their learning. So they were given that opportunity through school to still continue with their learning. Okay, so the final report. So what was the Back to School project? Well, before I start that, has anyone got any questions about the project before we go into the learning from the project and how we're taking it forward into our service?
I was just wondering, Judy, hi, it's Deborah here. I was just wondering about kind of what you were what outcomes you were looking to sort of measure from the project.
Yeah.
If I've missed that, I'm sorry.
No, that's fine. So we'll talk about of our sort of a hypothesis and our outcomes. I mean, I think I think probably our outcomes, what we wanted to achieve at the start, was that the children would be attending school. So children that had less than 70% attendance at school, we would increase their attendance at school. And I think what we realised halfway through the project, that actually the children that were being referred were those children that had that entrenched attendance issues. So actually what we went in with was around COVID. Actually what we transpired was we were dealing with a cohort of children that they were having attendance issues before COVID. So in a way, if you like, our outcomes changed, and that's what I'm talking about. Well, actually, if some of the families and some of the children started engaging in online learning, that for us was a good outcome. Yes, we're not going to get those children into school, but those children hadn't probably been in school for 2 or 3 years. So actually getting them engaged in online learning. And then some of the other case studies, and I haven't talked about case studies in this, but I'm happy to, is, you know, I know talking to one family support worker once who said actually some of these issues were entrenched mental health issues, where there was issues around not leaving the house. It wasn't just that they weren't going to school, they weren't leaving the house. So actually school was just part of the problem, and that's when we were working with our partners in CAMS. But things like, you wouldn't have seen this in a piece of work we would normally develop. I know one family support worker was working with a young person to go for a walk around the block, because actually that was the next step to them leaving the house. Another small step, and in another world we'd be thinking, we can't have a family having a family support worker for this such small step. But actually what we recognised, it was the stepping stones. So another one was the child was getting in the car with mum while she drove to the school to pick up some of the work. They'd not been near that school for like 2 years, and actually it was that slow. So I think what we noticed, what our outcomes would have been at the start, which is often the case, you want children to be back at school 100% loving it. Actually we needed to reevaluate the children we were getting. We needed, because we thought we were just going to be getting the children where there was an issue with COVID, and what we found was that of course the children that were coming through had entrenched. So in a way we lowered our expectations, lowered our outcomes, and they became softer. And actually they became softer because that was being child led.
Yeah, excellent, thank you.
Another question.
Hi Judy, yeah, just reflecting on what you're saying, and I might have missed this, but was there a reason why maybe they hadn't been picked up? Because my understanding is these weren't picked up until COVID actually happened, so I'm just interested to understand why they hadn't been
they were absolutely they were absolutely children that were known for missing education. We have a, you know, children missing education team, so they had absolutely been picked up. But this bespoke project, this is the learning. So the schools had been trying to get the children in, the EWO service had been trying to get the children in, and this will take on. So they weren't children that were completely, they were on roll at school, the school had been trying, but this was us coming together. We had the resource to say, actually now we're going to offer this family this really intensive package of work. So they weren't lost in the system. They were absolutely known, and this is what we're learning from it. But what they hadn't had is everybody coming together to say, actually this is what this family need. So we were in a position where we were able to offer those 3 visits a week, CAMS, working very much. So the learning that we've taken from this project is, how are we going to continue to support these children now where we've learned from that?
And I'm guessing that's one of the positives from COVID. There's been many negative things, hasn't there, about COVID? But one of the positive things is it's maybe encouraged us to work in a different way.
Yeah,
so maybe that's the, like I just say, that's the learning that's come from this then.
Yeah, and don't get us wrong, you know, these children had been worked with, they'd been known to our service before, they were certainly known, they were known to the school, but this was our opportunity to read, you know, you'll see when I talk about it, about the learning, what have we learned and what's the next steps for us now within in the service. So yes, the final report then, so as we said, it ran from March 2020 to March 21. So the Back to School project was set up to support children who were following a prolonged period of absence from school and were likely to struggle to re-engage in learning. So overall the project, we received 144 referrals were made, and that was from 59 institutions, educational settings, and the feedback from family support workers and families have been positive about the interventions and the focused nature of the work. Because one of the things that we talked about with this project is, ultimately we focused on supporting that child back into education of some sort, and even though we know children often with these particular issues, it's not just that particular issue, but that's the focus that we went in with the work. We were going to need to do work around routines and around their emotional and mental health, but that was what we were focusing on. That was our prime objective. Okay, so what did feedback from children and young people? So with any feedback from young people, I'll be, if you ever do a work session on feedback from young people, it is one of the hardest feedback that we gather from this, but we were able, of all the children that took part in the project, we were able to get feedback from 8 of the children. So they were low, but it was positive. All the children said that they found it useful to have a back to school family support worker, and all but one child said they would tell other people about the back to school project. So that was positive from our point of view. So what did our families tell us? So of all the 124 children accepted onto the back to school project, 86 parents, that's 70%, provided feedback of their experiences, which helped us through the evaluation. By far the most common reason given by parents for their children's non-attendance was stress and worry. So children were worried about returning back to school. In some of these cases, the prolonged period of absence from schools has increased their child's anxiety, but in the majority of the cases, anxiety about attending school already existed. Loss of routine was the second most common given for the non-attendance. So as we said before, not when we started the project, it's not what we envisaged, but that's what we had, and that's what we worked with. Okay, so parents were positive about the back to school project, 73% saying that they would recommend it to another child or family. 81% of parents liked having a family support working them on a particular issue of their child's attendance. In 63 of the cases, direct work was undertaken at least weekly to engage with the parent and the children. In 93% of the cases, parents felt the frequency was about right. So 60% of respondents felt the bespoke signs of safety tool worked well. So this plan on a page, it started to be referred to. So within my service, within the early help service, we can have, and you may or may not be aware of this in your service, there's early help assessments. So they are a larger piece of work with some of our families need that more holistic assessment. But one of the things that we've learned from this project, and since rolled out in my service generally, is some families need a shorter assessment. What are our worries? What are the strengths? And what do we need to do? And that is our signs of safety intervention plan. What families did like was the signposting to the courses was not a mechanism to enable families to access support. So unfortunately, those online sessions weren't as well attended as we had hoped. Now we've done a lot of reflection on this because you probably know that so much now is being delivered online. So a bit like the lady was saying earlier, we've learned a lot of things from COVID, a lot of positive things, and I think from a professional point of view, me here being able to deliver this to you now, and all the things that I now deliver online with my teams, but actually what we've recognized, that doesn't work for some families. So within my service, a lot of the families that we work with, they don't have the access to IT, they don't have the data, they sometimes don't have the internet connection. So where these sessions were being delivered online, and towards the end of the session some of them were being recorded and families could watch them back, what we've actually recognized is that some families, they're just not getting, they're either not able to access it online, or when they're watching it, they're not getting that interaction that you need, they're not getting that peer support. I mean, I've delivered parenting programs a long time ago, and just having parents in the room talking about some of the challenges that they face, they're not getting that either from virtually being in a room, or they're just not sitting next to somebody having a cup of tea. Whilst it recognises that addressing the multiple issues that families face is often the most appropriate way to effect change, we found in this project having a single focus worked well with families, and we'll consider other areas of intervention work in this way. So as I said before, because we focused on the school issue and the attendance issues, but we absolutely know from like the examples that I've used, just walking around the block, going in the car to get to school, it's that low level small steps to make the bigger changes that we need. But what families liked is, I've just got to focus on this. This is my one aim. This is what I need to focus on. But we know those other things will come. And it's sometimes we give families, I think sometimes too many, we need to work on this, we need to work on that, we need to work on this, and it becomes overwhelming. Whilst the focus has been maintained throughout while the focus has been maintained throughout the child's re-engagement into learning as the project has progressed, many small steps towards the goal have been achieved in evidence. So that's what we just talked about. So one of the things that you may remember I talked about as part of the project, we had 3 elements to it. We had the family support worker working in the family home, we had the online resources being delivered by our colleagues in the Health and Care Trust, but we also had the peer support. Now, this was one of the most challenging part of the projects that we found hard to get off the ground. What our vision was to get mentors, other young people who were able to talk to children and young people. Now, not necessarily children or young people that had experienced attendance issues, but if they had, great. And I'm sure at any one time, any child or young person would have said there's been periods of their education where they have, it's not been the best thing that they wanted to do. Now, we know that this can work so well, peer mentoring, but in a virtual world and in the complexities of it all, it's not straightforward. So unfortunately, it's fortunate for us we got it off the ground, but unfortunately for us, we didn't get it off the ground till the sort of start of this year, and then with other reasons it didn't focus a lot within the project. But towards the end, we were able to identify 5 mentors from Worcestershire Sixth Form College. So they were the 16, 17, 18-year-olds. They've been trained to offer peer support to back to school children that have been put forward. So we identified children from the back to school project that felt would benefit from a peer mentor, because we know not everybody would, or they weren't at the right space or right time. Mentors have been loaned a tablet from WCF on which they conduct their mentoring sessions. So there was a lot of learning for us around how this was going to work, because it was all done virtually, how it was going to work, even from a technical, practical point of view, how this was going to work. But people worked really, really hard to make it work. Although it was very early, and initial feedback from parents is positive, saying that 61% saying they feel support from the mentor is being really helpful, and 31% were saying it's a bit too early to say. So we've obtained early feedback from the mentors who did experience technical difficulties when trying to connect with their mentees virtually. However, they've responded they've enjoyed the experience and it's benefited their personal development. So I've just noticed there, spelled wrong. In relation to the mentors, so what was really important was the mentors were supported. They were actually helping their development around their sort of career aspirations. But there were young people that were having other young people to talk to. But I'll let you have a think about all the complexities that we've had around sort of safeguarding, how we're protecting, making sure, and I'll absolutely assure you it's been led by our education safeguarding lead within WCF, who is linked with a person within Worcestershire Sixth Form College, and there's a lot of safety and a lot of procedure around this. Okay, so the next steps then for our findings. So this has been a great project. We've had we've had some really good outcomes for children. Even we've had children that have returned back to school, but we've had some children that haven't returned back to school, but they're now engaged on online learning. They're still on that path to re-engaging, and there's some children where we've had to say this is not the right time, and we've handed them back to school. But for us as a service, what have we found? So learning from our Signs of Safety bespoke course tool for practice. So that single plan on a page, concentrate on one aspect of life, one aspect of a concern, one aspect of a worry. That is something we have now brought into to the service. We now use, rather than some families receiving a whole early help assessment, we are just having that plan on a page intervention plan. So where we focus on one piece of work, and we've incorporated that in our now single delivery of service. And we've also looking at the impact of digital exclusion, how we're going to feed that in, back into our early help strategy. So absolutely, we know there is a place, and we know there is lots of families that can access virtual support, but we also know that there's some families that can't. Now, that isn't just about them accessing us. We know the modern world now requires so much intervention. I mean, if anyone's ever tried to ring any energy company now, or nobody wants to talk to anyone on the phone. It's live chat, it's virtual. So we need to look at how we can support our families to access that virtual learning. Okay, so what we've been looking at is how we're going to support family support workers to accompany families onto some of the online health and wellbeing workshops, because some of the vision that we wanted with some of those online workshops was for family support workers and for families to sort of interact with them together, so they can get that peer support that we've talked about, to get that reflection. So actually that didn't happen this time around, but how could that happen virtually? How can those sessions be delivered online? Because some families it absolutely suits, but how can family support workers access them? So that's something else we're going to be taking forward. And this goes back to the question that we had before. How are we within WCF, how are we going to revisit the offer of our education welfare role and function, and how it will develop the learning from this? What has worked from young people and their parents of the Back to School project? So myself and the manager that oversees the education welfare role within WCF, we are live now, because this only finished six weeks ago. How are we going to develop the education welfare role? For anyone that knows the education welfare role, historically it was seen as very sort of authoritarian. It was around sanctions, it was around the legality, the fining, but actually, and there is a role for that, and that is part of what education welfare need to work with families, but actually that more parent-led, strength-based model, work the school and the school and the family working together. We're going to be reviewing that offer, and the peer mentor service. So even though it was early days towards the end of the project, that now, and I know from having conversations recently, we're really going to be looking at how we can roll that out around any aspect, so we can get young people talking together, because young people understand young people as much as I try to think I understand young people. There is going to be that opportunity to speak to someone who's a couple of years older than you, potentially will have been through similar experiences, but not necessarily. So that is going to be looked at how we roll that out across Worcestershire. So the conclusion then. So the Back to School project was successfully developed positive outcomes for children identified by both parents and family support workers and children during a period of unprecedented and rapidly challenging requirements for engagement in education. This is particularly pleasing given that nearly 2/3 of all children accepted onto the project had long-term entrenched attendance issues prior to the additional COVID-related challenges. So I think what we were saying was at the start is we've got a completely different cohort of children, but we've still managed to evidence, and if that's something we want after when the final project report is released, then that might be something that we want to share alongside this. As the project progressed, it was recognised that although the focus of the Back to School remained central to the work, progress towards the goal was better evidenced through the achievement of many small steps, building blocks towards re-engagement and learning appropriate for each child. So like we were saying before, that getting in the car, that sometimes just that relationship between the school and the family is positive. This learning will be incorporated into the development of our early help and supporting families work with schools within WCF Business Planning and within Worcestershire Safeguarding Partnership Forum in relation to their role in monitoring the effectiveness of early help. So this project is going across all developments of the service. What have we learned from this project around working with families and working with education? So that's it. Any questions? Anybody out there?
Hi, thank you so much, Judy. That was so interesting. Really enjoyed hearing about the way the project progressed as well. I find that really interesting, just having to be adaptable and as well.
That's often the way, isn't it? That's often the way. You sort of think you're going down one road, but what we did have is that opportunity to to change it and re-establish it for what was needed as opposed to what we thought was needed.
Yeah, absolutely. No, thank you so much. Has anyone else got any more questions at all for Judy?
Not a question as such, but it was really interesting, Judy. I mean, I come from an adults background, but I do have a young child myself. It sort of crossed my mind how, you know, how difficult it's been for children, particularly more vulnerable children, through all of this, really. And it's
Yeah.
really interesting to hear what projects, you know, you've been up to, and I think there's
Yeah.
obviously been a lot of learning from that, hasn't there, to take forward. So that's great.
Yeah, and in the full report, it does break down the age group, and we did have a significant higher, the sort of high school 12, 13, 14, because, you know, it was always felt like, you know, you can't, we did have younger children, but it was more those, you know, those bigger children, if you like, refusing to go to school. You've got very little wriggle room, haven't you? Whereas but we did get, you know, young ones really anxious, you know, really anxious, and especially those ones that had maybe only been at school a couple of months, you know, so the ones that had started in September 2019 into 2020, then a whole 6 months out, and then it's all re-establishing that transition again. So you know, we did have a wide range of ages.
That's brilliant. Thank you. There's so much in that as well, isn't there, with the peer mentoring as well?
Yeah, and that was, I mean, I won't go into the challenges that faced. I mean, you know, when we were talking about loaning teenagers laptops, talking to other young people, I mean, I was nearly falling off the chair thinking, oh my God, this is never going to work. I was just seeing all the safeguarding issues, but it has worked, and it is very structured. But that is something we're really excited about, how we can you know, really get that off the ground, because, you know, having that other young person to speak to, as much as us professionals think we know, you know, what we know, but actually, you know, we don't, do we? So that's going to be really exciting how that rolls out.
Yeah,
Definitely. Thank you.
Brilliant. There might be something you can come back and talk to us about in a
yes,
future time.
but I might leave that to my colleague Denise Hannibal, who was actually overseeing it, but I'll see. I've not enjoyed it.
That's fine. We don't mind. We'd love to hear more about it anyway as it goes on. So thank you so much. So if nobody else, I'll just check if anyone else has any more questions before I tell you about the feedback. Anyone? No. Okay. Well, thank you so much, Judy, for your time. Yeah, that's fine. Just let people know that there is a link in the chat to give some feedback. It's a Survey Monkey. It doesn't take very long at all, but if you could fill that out for us, that would be great. And like I said, it's really important that we hear your experiences. And thank you so much, everybody.
Thanks a lot then. Bye, everyone.
Bye. Thanks. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Hiya, you there?